Welcome to the Deep Dive. We take a stack of your sources articles, research your own notes, and, well, we extract the most important nuggets of knowledge and insight. Think of it as a shortcut to being well-informed, maybe with surprising facts and just enough humor to keep you hooked. Today, we're plunging right into a really high-stakes, real-world clash, one that pitted two fundamental rights against each other: individual digital privacy versus, well, national security.
Yeah, it's a classic right versus right dilemma. Genuinely one of the most profound we've seen in recent tech history, I think. And right at the heart of it, Apple. This was back in February 2016. Just after that terrible terrorist attack in San Bernardino, California, the U.S. government, the FBI, they made this direct, unprecedented demand. They wanted Apple to build, well, a backdoor into a slain terrorist's iPhone to get crucial information out.
And Apple CEO Tim Cook said no, flat out refused. So the core of this deep dive is really asking, was he justified? Was that refusal the right call? What were the truly profound right versus right dilemmas tangled up in this? Because it seems like everyone had a legitimate point, a legitimate claim.
Mm-hmm. And our mission today is to unpack this whole complex situation. We'll look closely at the stances of both Apple and the U.S. government. We'll also dig into Apple's long history with privacy, explore what that backdoor request really meant, the implications, and finally we'll apply this powerful ethical framework. It's called the dirty hands problem. It really helps illuminate the, frankly, impossible challenges leaders face in situations like these.
Right, and we should say all of this is rooted in a detailed business case study. That lets us go beyond the headlines, really grasp the nuances. So let's set the scene. Let's dive into the incident itself, the one that ignited this whole firestorm.
Okay. The incident itself, just horrific. December 2nd, 2015, San Bernardino, California. A married couple, Syed Rizwan Farouk and Tashfeen Malik, they carried out this shooting at a holiday party, killed 14 people, injured 22 more. The FBI immediately launched an investigation, treating it as terrorism. They were urgently looking for motives, networks, any co-conspirators.
Yeah, and they recovered an iPhone. It was in the vehicle where the couple was killed after a gunfight with police. But here's a key detail. It wasn't even Farouk's personal phone. It belonged to his employer, San Bernardino County. And the friggin' county, they actually consented to a search of the device, so permission wasn't the issue there.
Exactly. The immediate hurdle for the FBI was technical. They knew the iPhone had security features built in, specifically one that would permanently erase all the data after 10 failed passcode attempts. So they couldn't just, try every combination, brute force it. They risked losing everything, which is why they went to Apple for direct help. They asked them to create this backdoor, basically, a new compromised version of the iPhone's operating system, iOS. The idea was the special software would let them bypass the passcode limit and the auto erase feature just for this one phone.
And the government was very specific, right? They stressed this is a one-off case, just for this single phone. The U.S. Justice Department filed an application, got a federal court order compelling Apple to provide, quote, reasonable technical assistance to disable that security feature. They even claimed Apple had the, quote, exclusive technical means to do it. But yeah, the big question hanging over Apple was, what happens next time? What's the precedent?
Exactly. And this is where you really bump up against Apple's core philosophy. To understand why they pushed back so hard, you have to look at their foundational commitment to customer privacy.
Absolutely. I mean, Apple, founded by Steve Jobs and Steve Wozniak way back in '76, their vision was user-friendly computers.
Yeah.
Fast forward to 2016, the iPhone is everything. It's their flagship to their revenue. And what's really interesting, maybe often overlooked about Apple's business model, is how it's built. They sell products. They don't harvest user data for ads.
Which is fundamentally different from, say, Google or Facebook at the time.
Totally different. So Apple's privacy stance isn't just like an ethical preference. It's core to their brand, their competitive edge. It's strategic.
Right. And Tim Cook, who took over as CEO in 2011, he'd been championing customer privacy for years already, since at least 2010. Even when Apple built features like location tracking into the iPhone, control was always left with the user. It wasn't some sudden pivot for them in 2016.
Then, boom, 2013. The Edward Snowden revelations land, exposing the NSA's PRISM surveillance program. And that showed the government was collecting vast amounts of data from tech companies, including Apple. That really hit a nerve, didn't it?
Wow.
With the public, with customers, it shifted the whole conversation around digital privacy.
Oh, massively. And you saw Apple react directly to that. In response to those concerns, they started implementing stronger and stronger encryption. By the time iOS 8 came out, they designed it so that even Apple's own engineers couldn't get data off a locked phone. And Cook was very public about this. He wrote an open letter to customers in September 2014. I think I have the quote here somewhere.
Right.
Yeah. He said, security and privacy are fundamental to the design of all our hardware, software, and services. We don't build a profile based on your email content or web browsing habits to sell to advertisers. We don't monetize the information you store on your iPhone. Our commitment to protecting your privacy comes from a deep respect for our customers. I mean, that's a pretty clear line in the sand.
Well, yeah, very clear. So you've got Apple with this deep-seated privacy ethos on one side, hardened by those public revelations. But the government, they had their own compelling arguments, right? And a broader context for why they were making this demand, especially with the rising threat of terrorism.
Absolutely. The national security imperative felt incredibly stark at that moment. The internet, social media, they were increasingly being used by extremist groups to plan attacks, spread propaganda. Law enforcement felt like they were losing visibility, losing critical ground in the digital world. They felt technology was outpacing their ability to investigate.
And this fight over encryption, it wasn't exactly new, was it?
No, not at all. This had been simmering for a decade, this dispute between the government and tech companies. Actually, back in 2010, the Obama administration had even drafted legislation trying to force tech companies to provide unencrypted data when required. Similar to old laws for phone companies, the Snowden leaks kind of put that specific effort on ice politically, but the underlying tension, it never went away.
Right, and President Obama himself spoke to that tension, didn't he?
He did. He famously said, you can't have 100% security and also then have 100% privacy and zero inconvenience, which really sums up the trade-off that many in government felt was just unavoidable, a necessary compromise.
It's also interesting, though, that tech companies, including Apple, they were cooperating in some ways, right? They were trying to be transparent about government requests.
Yeah, they were. Apple, for example, disclosed that in the first half of 2015, they got somewhere between 750 and 999 national security requests. They pointed out this affected a tiny fraction of their customers, like 0.000673%. So cooperation was happening on legally mandated requests for data they actually possessed. This felt different.
Okay. So despite that history of some cooperation, Apple's refusal here in the San Bernardino case was absolute. Firm. And Tim Cook's why, the reasoning he laid out in that public letter that became really pivotal.
Hugely pivotal.
So when Cook put out that, 1,100-word open letter responding to the court order, what was the absolute gut argument? What was this dangerous thing he said the government wanted?
The core of it was that the government was demanding Apple create something that, one, Apple insisted it simply did not have, and two, that it considered too dangerous to create. The killer phrase, the one that really stuck, was the master key. He argued that, well, yes, the request was officially for just one phone. The software they'd have to build, well, it would have the potential to unlock any iPhone in anyone's physical possession. He literally called it the equivalent of a master key capable of opening hundreds of millions of locks. And crucially, he argued there was no guarantee its use could actually be limited, despite the government's assurances. Once it exists, it exists.
That's a potent analogy, a master key. You don't just use it once and throw it away. So what were the wider implications for encryption generally?
Well, Apple's argument was that building this kind of backdoor would fundamentally defeat the very purpose of encryption. Full stop. It wouldn't just be a tool for the good guys, for law enforcement. It would inevitably create a vulnerability, a weakness that, if discovered or leaked or stolen, could be exploited by anyone, criminals, foreign governments, hackers. It would bypass security for millions and millions of users globally. So they felt they were being asked, essentially, to hack their own users, to undermine decades of security advancements.
And you get the sense this wasn't just like a cold corporate calculation for Cook. It felt deeply tied to his personal values, his leadership philosophy, almost a moral line.
I think that's right. You look at his public statements, like that 2015 commencement address at George Washington University. He talked about finding your North Star, about solving problems, ending injustices. He emphasized that personal values shouldn't or don't just get left at the office door. He talked about doing things because they're just and right, about being the pebble in the pond that creates the ripple for change. And you saw that philosophy reflected in his leadership style. generally fostering more openness at Apple, corporate philanthropy, really prioritizing that customer experience, maybe even over immediate profit sometimes.
Now, we should also probably touch on the market context here. Apple was doing well under Cook, right? Stock price up, huge cash reserves.
Very strong financially, yes. But there had been a recent slowdown in iPhone sales growth. And literally that same month, February 2016, Apple had just lost the title of most valuable public company to Alphabet, Google's parent company. So the timing was interesting. And the government, well, their perspective, or at least the one they voiced publicly, was a bit more cynical. They suggested Apple's refusal wasn't purely ethical, but heavily influenced by its business model and public brand marketing strategy, protecting the brand.
Right, okay. So you have these two powerful forces, Apple and the government, both arguing from a position of right. National security versus individual privacy, high stakes. How does a leader even begin to navigate that? And this brings us to that ethical framework you mentioned earlier, the dirty hands problem.
Yeah, the dirty hands problem. It's a concept from Joseph Badaracco, an ethics professor. And it's designed specifically for situations like this one. It describes those moments when managers aren't choosing between a clear right and a clear wrong. Instead, they face right versus right choices, clashes between different conflicting moral principles, different spheres of responsibility. It's not about being unethical necessarily, but about knowing that whichever path you choose, you might compromise some legitimate value. Your hands get dirty either way because there's no perfectly clean outcome.
That's a really important distinction, isn't it? No clean choice. And Badaracco talks about four key areas, four spheres of commitment for managers that often collide in these moments. What are they?
Okay, so the first sphere is private life. This is about our commitments to sort of abstract universal principles, your personal ethics. So for Cook, you could see his personal commitment to privacy and maybe justice fitting here.
Okay. Sphere 1, private life. What's next?
Sphere 2, commitments as economic agents. This is the traditional business responsibility, serving shareholders, maximizing wealth, ensuring the company thrives financially. So Apple's stock price, their revenue, the business impact of this fight, that all falls here.
Got it. Private life, economic agent. Third,
Commitments as company leaders. This is about shaping the lives and well-being of employees, fostering the company culture. Cook's influence on Apple's culture of openness, of prioritizing privacy that's relevant here. How would creating a backdoor impact the engineers who built the security in the first place?
right, the internal impact.
Yeah.
And the final sphere.
Finally, number 4, responsibilities beyond the firm's boundaries. This covers obligations to entities outside the company, government agencies, customers, a big one here, suppliers, society as a whole. And this is obviously where that huge tension between national security, an obligation to government and society perhaps, versus citizen privacy, an obligation to customers, plays out so directly.
Okay, so those are the conflicting spheres.
Yeah.
How does Badaracco suggest a leader actually thinks through resolving these clashes?
He offers 4 key questions. Think of them as lenses to examine the dilemma. The first is, which course of action will do the most good and the least harm? This is classic consequentialism or utilitarianism, often linked to John Stuart Mill. You weigh the outcomes. The potential good of maybe stopping future attacks by unlocking this phone versus the potential harm of creating a vulnerability that could affect millions.
Okay, weigh the good versus the harm. What's the second question?
Second, which alternative best serves others' rights? This taps into a rights-based ethical view, think Thomas Jefferson, fundamental rights. So here, you're contrasting the government's pursuit of justice for the victims, the right to security for the nation, against Apple's defense of its customers' digital privacy rights. Whose rights should prevail in this specific conflict?
Right versus right, literally. Okay, third question.
Third question gets personal. What plan can I live with, consistent with my basic values and commitments? This is about integrity, conscience, maybe Aristotle's ideas about character. This brings Cook's personal North Star into focus and Apple's stated mission to protect users. Could he, personally and as CEO, live with the decision to create that master key, given everything he and the company stood for?
Makes sense. Integrity. And the last question, the pragmatic one.
Exactly. The fourth question is very pragmatic, sometimes linked to Machiavelli. Which course of action is feasible in the world as it is? This forces you to consider the realities. Apple's power, yes, but also its market position. The very real risks, legal, reputational, technical, of either choice. And the time pressure. Remember, they initially had just 5 days to respond to that court order. What was actually possible under those constraints?
Wow. So when you look at Cook's decision through those 4 lenses, consequences, rights, integrity, feasibility, It really underlines just how complex this was. It wasn't remotely simple, not just black and white.
Not at all. It was a multifaceted ethical tightrope walk with huge potential consequences no matter which way he leaned.
So this deep dive into Apple versus the FBI, I mean, it just perfectly illustrates these incredibly complex right versus right ethical dilemmas that leaders, especially in tech now, are increasingly facing. It really wasn't about choosing right from wrong. It was about navigating between two competing legitimate rights, both with really profound implications.
Absolutely. And it highlights this ongoing dynamic interplay, doesn't it? Between rapidly changing technology, the responsibilities corporations have, our individual liberties, and of course, national security. That tension isn't going away. If anything, it's getting more intense as our lives become more and more digital.
So maybe we leave you, the listener, with this thought to chew on. In a world where digital tech gives us so much convenience but also creates these new kinds of threats, how do you weigh that balance between, say, total security and absolute privacy? What responsibilities do you think tech companies really have? And what role should governments play, especially when something like a master key could potentially unlock millions of our private digital lives? Where do you draw the line?